I arrived in Copper Creek, Montana with $3, a stolen name, and a lie folded so tight it fit inside my glove. The man waiting for me didn't know I was running from a dead husband's enemies. He didn't know my real name, and he definitely didn't know that in 6 months I'd have to choose between saving him or saving myself. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the station, throwing me forward against the wooden seat. My fingers found the edge of my valise, gripping until my knuckles went white. Through the window I could see him, Silas Thorne, the man who'd answered my letter, the man who'd agreed to marry a woman he'd never met based on nothing but a photograph and 3 pages of careful lies. He stood apart from the small crowd, back against a weathered post, hat pulled low, tall, broader through the shoulders than I'd expected. His coat hung open despite the cold, and I could see the way he held himself. Weight shifted slightly, to the left, as though favoring something on his right side. I stepped down from the coach before the driver could offer his hand. My boots hit the frozen ground, and the cold went straight through the thin leather. October in Montana. Winter was coming, the locals said, coming fast. Silas pushed away from the post and walked toward me, not hurried, not eager, just steady, like a man checking on something he'd ordered and wanted to make sure hadn't arrived broken. We stood 3 feet apart. His eyes moved over my face, comparing me to the photograph I'd sent, a photograph that wasn't entirely me, close enough to pass, different enough to matter if anyone came looking. Mrs. Wright. His voice was low, rough from disuse. Mr. Thorne. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us pretended this was anything other than what it was, a transaction, an arrangement, 2 people who needed something from each other and were willing to pay the price. He reached for my valise. I pulled it back, just slightly, before letting him take it. Inside were 3 dresses, a Bible I'd never read, writing paper, ink, and at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a bundle of documents that powerful men would kill to possess. That all you brought? He nodded toward the single bag. I travel light. Something flickered in his eyes. Not suspicion, something else. Recognition, maybe. The look of one damaged person seeing the damage in another. He turned without another word and walked toward 2 horses tied at the rail. I followed, keeping my steps measured, my face calm. But my heart was hammering against my ribs because I'd just noticed something that made my blood run cold. Across the street, leaning against the wall of the general store, stood a man in a bowler hat and a coat too fine for this town. He wasn't looking at me directly, but he was watching. I could feel it. I climbed onto the horse Silas indicated, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. That surprised him. I saw it in the way his eyebrows lifted, just slightly, before he swung up onto his own mount. We rode out of Copper Creek in silence. The man in the bowler hat didn't follow, but I memorized his face anyway. Square jaw, thin lips, eyes the color of dirty ice. The trail wound up into the mountains, narrow and steep. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, their branches heavy with the promise of snow. The air grew colder with each mile, and I could see my breath coming out in white clouds. I watched Silas as we rode, the way he held the reins only in his left hand, the way his right shoulder sat lower than his left, tension visible even through his heavy coat, an old injury, something that hadn't healed right. After an hour, he spoke without turning around. Trail gets rougher from here. You need to stop. You say so. I'm fine. Wasn't asking if you were fine. Asking if you need to stop. I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. The cabin appeared as the sun began to drop behind the western ridge. One room, weathered logs, a chimney leaking thin gray smoke. No garden, no curtains, no flowers or any other sign that a woman had ever set foot in this place. Silas dismounted and tied both horses to a post. He lifted my valise without looking at me and carried it toward the door. I stood in the yard for a moment, looking around. Behind the cabin, a woodshed. To the left, a small barn. and beyond that, nothing but trees and mountains, and the kind of emptiness that either saves a person or swallows them whole. The door stood open. I walked through it. The interior was exactly what I'd expected. A cast-iron stove squatting cold in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with tins and jars, everything arranged with military precision. A narrow bed against one wall, a ladder leading up to a loft. Everything in its place, everything controlled, the home of a man who'd been alone so long he'd forgotten how to share space. "Your room's through there." Silas pointed to a door I hadn't noticed, partially hidden behind a curtain of rough canvas. I crossed to it and looked inside. A small space, barely wider than the bed that occupied most of it. A single window, a trunk at the foot of the bed, clean but cold, so cold I could see my breath. "I sleep in the loft," Silas said from behind me. "You handle the cooking, the cleaning, keeping the fire. I handle everything outside. Wood, water, hunting, repairs." I turned to face him. "And we don't talk about before." His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's right." "Suits me." Something passed between us then, an understanding. We were both running from something, both hiding, both willing to accept the other's secrets, as long as our own stayed buried. He moved to the stove and began building a fire. I set my valise on the bed in the small room and opened it. My hands found the bundle of fabric at the bottom, the one wrapped around my mother's tablecloth. Blue linen with embroidered wild indigo flowers. She'd stitched them herself years ago, back when there was still time for such things. I carried it out to the main room and spread it across the rough pine table. Silas froze. His hand stilled on the kindling. He stared at the tablecloth, and for just a moment, his face went completely blank. Then something cracked through. Pain, raw and immediate. He turned back to the stove without a word and finished building the fire. The flames caught. Light crawled up the walls. I didn't ask. He didn't explain. Supper was beans from a tin and hard bread. We ate facing each other across the table, the blue cloth between us like a border neither of us knew how to cross. When he finished, he stood, rinsed his plate in a bucket by the door, and climbed the ladder to the loft without saying good night. I sat alone in the main room. The fire popped and hissed. Wind pressed against the window glass. I should have felt afraid. Alone in the wilderness with a stranger. No way out if things went wrong. But I didn't feel afraid. I felt something worse. I felt seen. The way he'd looked at that tablecloth. The way his whole body had tensed. He'd recognized something in it. Some memory. Some ghost. I stood and went to my small room. The bed was hard, the blankets thin. I lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. From above, I heard him moving in the loft, the creak of boards, the rustle of blankets. Then silence. I reached under my pillow and pulled out the letter, the one that had been waiting for me at the last town. No name on the envelope, no return address, just 3 words written in a hand I recognized. "We are coming." I folded it again and slid it back under the pillow. Then I closed my eyes and tried to convince myself that $3 and a new name would be enough to keep me alive. The pattern established itself quickly. I woke before dawn each morning when frost covered the inside of the window glass, dressed in the dark, wool stockings first, then the heavy skirt, then the shawl wrapped twice around my shoulders. The stove was always my first task. Kindling, small logs, the bigger pieces once the flames caught. By the time Silas climbed down from the loft, the cabin was warming and coffee was ready. He never said thank you, but he never left without drinking a full cup. I learned his rhythms in those first weeks. The way he checked the door latch twice before sitting down to eat. The way he only used his left hand for anything requiring strength. The way he avoided looking directly at me, as though eye contact might create some obligation neither of us wanted. And I learned that he waited. Every morning, no matter how hungry he must have been, he waited until I sat down at the table before he picked up his fork. I tested it once, stayed at the stove longer than necessary, stirring a pot that didn't need stirring, watched from the corner of my eye as Silas sat with his plate full, fork in hand, not moving. When I finally sat, he began eating. No comment, no acknowledgement, just that simple courtesy that felt more intimate than any words could have been. The days took on a shape. He left before full light and came back when the sun touched the ridge. I cooked, cleaned, mended, kept the fire burning. We ate together at the table with my mother's cloth spread between us, and the silence was heavy, but not hostile. 2 weeks after I arrived, Katie Sauer came up the mountain. I saw her through the window, riding a gray mare with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey 100 times before. She was older than I'd expected, 60 at least, with steel-gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mrs. Thorne?" Her voice was flat, neither welcoming nor hostile. "Mrs. Sauer." She looked past me into the cabin, taking in the tablecloth, the clean floor, the pot simmering on the stove. Her mouth tightened. "So you're the new one." The words landed like a slap. "I'm Eleanor Wright. Silas and I were married by proxy in Philadelphia." "I know what you are." Katie's eyes came back to my face. "I was Eliza's friend. Watched her die in this cabin 12 years ago. Watched him bury her behind the woodshed. Watched him die inside right along with her." I kept my face neutral, but my heart was hammering. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "Good, because you couldn't." She stepped past me into the cabin without invitation, walked straight to the table and put her hand on the blue cloth. Wild indigo. Eliza hated this flower, said it reminded her of funerals. The room went very still. Katie looked at me, something almost like curiosity in her eyes now. "But you didn't know that, did you?" "No." She moved to the stove, lifted the lid on the pot, sniffed. "Venison stew. He likes it with more salt." "I'll remember." She replaced the lid and turned to face me fully. "I came to check on him, make sure you weren't some confidence woman here to rob him blind." "I'm not." "Maybe not, but you're running from something. I can see it in your eyes, the way you flinched when you heard my horse, the way you're standing between me and that valise like it holds the crown jewels." I didn't move, didn't deny it. Katie nodded slowly. "We all got secrets up here. Silas most of all. You want my advice? Keep yours. Don't go digging into his, and for God's sake, don't fall in love with him. That won't be a problem." That's what Eliza said, too, at first. She moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. There was a man in town yesterday, city fellow, asking questions about newcomers, specifically asking about women traveling alone." My blood went cold. What did he look like? Bowler hat, fancy coat, eyes like dirty ice. The same man from the station. Katie saw my reaction. "Thought so. I told him nothing, but he's not the type to give up easy." She paused at the threshold. "You brought trouble here, Mrs. Wright, whether you meant to or not. Question is, when it catches up to you, are you going to run, or are you going to fight?" She left without waiting for an answer. I stood in the empty cabin, heart racing, and looked at the valise, at the documents hidden inside, at the life I'd tried to leave behind. Then I heard the horse, Silas, coming back early. I met him at the door. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed. "Katie was here," I said. "I saw her on the trail." He moved past me, favoring his right leg more than usual. Something was wrong. "Silas!" He stopped but didn't turn around. "That man she mentioned, the one asking questions, I know who he is." Now he turned, looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "And?" "He's looking for me." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down heavily. "You want to tell me why?" I sat across from him. put my hands flat on the blue tablecloth, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, I told part of the truth. My husband died 2 years ago. He was a judge in Philadelphia. A good man, honest. I paused. Maybe too honest. After he died, men came to the house, looking for papers they said belonged to their business. I didn't give them what they wanted, so I left. What kind of papers? Legal documents, property deeds, evidence of fraud. Silas leaned back in his chair. And you brought them here. It wasn't a question. Yes. Why? Because if I destroy them, innocent people lose their land. And if I give them back, those same people lose their land. The only way to protect anyone is to keep them hidden until I can find someone who'll use them the right way. And the man in the bowler hat? Vincent Mercer. He was one of the men who came to my door. He's a lawyer, works for the railroad company that wants those deeds. Silas absorbed this in silence. Outside, the wind picked up. The first snow of the season began to fall, soft and steady. Finally, he spoke. You tell me he's dangerous? Very. He know you're here? I don't think so, but he's looking. Silas stood and moved to the window, watched the snow come down. You planning to run when he finds you? The question hung in the air between us. I don't know, I said honestly. He turned back to face me. Well, when you decide, you let me know. Because if you're staying, we need to be ready. And if you're running, you should go before the snow gets too deep. Something in my chest tightened. You're not telling me to leave? Not my business why you came here. You're doing the work, keeping your end of the arrangement. Rest of it is yours to handle. But his eyes said something different. They said he understood, that he recognized the weight of secrets and the impossibility of outrunning the past. I nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He moved toward the ladder. Storm's coming in. Big one. I need to check the south fence before it hits. Should be back by nightfall. Silas. He paused, one hand on the ladder rung. Be careful. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd arrived. Then he climbed up to the loft to get his heavy coat. I went to my room and pulled the bundle from my valise, unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside, 50 pages of carefully documented fraud. Names, dates, forged signatures, enough to bring down a dozen powerful men, enough to get me killed. I heard Silas climb down from the loft, heard the door open and close. Through my small window, I watched him ride toward the fence line, his figure growing smaller against the white landscape. The snow fell harder. By mid-afternoon, the world had turned completely white. I kept the fire burning, made bread, mended a tear in one of Silas's shirts. Normal things, ordinary things. The kind of things a wife might do while waiting for her husband to come home, except I wasn't really his wife. And he wasn't really coming home. He was just returning to a place we both happened to occupy. 5 o'clock came, then 6. The light failed early, swallowed by the storm. I lit the oil lamp and set it in the window. Heated water for coffee, let it cool. Heated it again. 7 o'clock. The wind screamed against the walls. Snow piled against the door. 8 o'clock. My hands shook every time I poured out the cold coffee and heated fresh water. I told myself this was practical. If he died out there, I'd be stranded. Alone. No way down the mountain until spring. But my hands kept shaking and I knew I was lying to myself. At 8:30, the door burst open. Silas stumbled inside on a blast of wind and snow, his face crusted with ice, his coat frozen stiff. He pushed the door closed with his whole body and stood there, breathing hard. I was across the room before I could think. You're half frozen. I'm fine. You're not fine. Sit down. For once, he didn't argue. He let me help him to the chair by the fire. Let me pull off his gloves, revealing fingers red and stiff with cold. I brought the coffee I'd kept warm. He wrapped both hands around the cup, and I saw him register it. The heat. The fact that it was fresh, not hours old. You kept it hot, he said. Coffee goes cold. He looked up at me. His eyes held something I couldn't name, something that made my breath catch. Thank you, he said quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and went to get blankets. That night, I lay in my narrow bed and listened to him move in the loft, restless, in pain probably, from the cold and the long ride, and I thought about the way he'd looked at me, the way my heart had hammered when I'd seen him come through the door. This was dangerous, this feeling, this caring. I'd come here to hide, to survive, not to feel anything for anyone. But as I drifted toward sleep, I heard him speak from the loft above, not loudly, just a murmur, half lost in dreams. I'm sorry. I should have been faster. Not Eliza's name, not a woman's name at all, just that apology, offered to ghosts in the dark. And I understood then. This man wasn't just grieving. He was drowning in guilt. I knew that drowning. I'd been doing it for 2 years. The next morning I found the woodpile had been reorganized. The heavy pieces moved to chest height, where I could reach them easily. The kindling sorted and stacked. He'd done it before dawn in the cold, with a body still aching from yesterday's ride. I stood there in the snow, looking at the neat rows, and felt something crack open in my chest. That afternoon, while Silas was out checking the trap lines, I rearranged the shelf where he kept his tools, put the ones he used most often on the left side, where he could reach them with his good hand, moved the oil and rags to the lower shelf so he wouldn't have to stretch. We didn't speak about any of it. But the next morning, I found a small jar on the table, liniment, oil of camphor and coal, the kind used for aching joints and old injuries. I left it there, untouched, all day. That night, when I went to bank the fire, the jar was half empty. We were building something. Neither of us would name it. Neither of us would acknowledge it. But it was there, growing between us like the snow accumulating outside. Quiet, inevitable, dangerous. A week after the storm, I sat at the table writing a letter. The cipher came easily now, muscle memory from years of practice. Numbers for common words, symbols for names. A code my sister and I had developed as children and perfected as adults. I was so focused I didn't hear Silas come down from the loft. What language is that? I jumped, nearly spilling the ink. Turned to find him standing 3 feet behind me, looking at the paper. Nothing, just notes. He moved closer. Notes in cipher. My heart hammered. It's personal. In my house. His voice was quiet but steel underneath. You're writing coded messages to someone. I think I have a right to know why. I stood, putting my body between him and the letter. You said we don't talk about before. Before is one thing. Active correspondence in code is different. We stood facing each other. The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called. I'm not a spy, I said. Then what are you? The question hung between us. I could lie, deflect, pack my things and disappear before morning, or I could trust him, just a little, just enough. I told you my husband died, that men came looking for papers. I remember. What I didn't tell you is that those men are still looking. The papers I took, they're worth a fortune, enough to make people kill for them. I write to my sister in Philadelphia in code, because if they're watching the mail, plain English would tell them exactly where to find me. Silas absorbed this. Your sister know you're here? No, I only tell her I'm safe, nothing more. Why not? Because the less she knows, the less she can tell if someone asks the wrong questions. He studied my face for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised me. He nodded. All right. All right? You're protecting yourself. Protecting her. I understand that. He moved toward the stove. Coffee? I sat down slowly, my legs suddenly weak. You're not going to press? You want to tell me more, you'll tell me. You don't, you won't. Pushing won't change anything. He poured 2 cups and brought one to me. Besides, we all got secrets. You keep yours, I'll keep mine. He went back to the fire, and we sat in a silence that felt different now. Not hostile, not even uncomfortable. Understanding, maybe. Two damaged people agreeing not to examine each other's wounds too closely. I returned to my letter, but found I couldn't focus. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of trust. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark thinking about Katie's words. Don't fall in love with him. Too late, I thought. Or maybe not love. Not yet. But something was growing. Something that scared me more than Vincent Mercer. More than the men who wanted me dead. Because caring about someone meant having something to lose. And I'd already lost too much. I got up and moved to the window. The moon was full, turning the snow blue-white, beautiful and cold and empty. Then I saw it. Fresh tracks in the snow, leading from the tree line to the cabin wall, then back again. Someone had been here, tonight, while we slept. I grabbed my shawl and opened my door, crossed to the main door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch. The tracks were clear in the moonlight. Boot prints, a man's size. They circled the cabin, stopped at each window, then headed back toward the trees. My breath came short and fast. Mercer, or someone working for him. They knew I was here. I turned to go back inside and found Silas standing in the doorway in his union suit, bare feet on the frozen porch. Someone was here, I said. He looked at the tracks. His jaw tightened. How long ago? I don't know. The snow stopped falling around midnight, so after that, he went back inside and came out with his rifle. Walked to where the tracks disappeared into the trees, studied the ground. One man, walking, not running, came to look, not to attack. How do you know? Attack. He'd have come to the door, tried to get inside. This is reconnaissance. He looked at me. They're figuring out the layout, how many people, where everyone sleeps. They'll come back. Probably. I wrapped my shawl tighter. I should leave, before they do. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he shouldered the rifle and walked back to the porch. That what you want? To run? I don't want to bring trouble down on you. Too late. Trouble's already here. He met my eyes. Question is whether you're going to face it, or spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Easy for you to say. They're not trying to kill you. No, they're just trying to take my land. Same result. I lose everything either way. He moved toward the door. Sleep on it. Decide in the morning. But if you stay, we do this together. No more secrets about who's coming or why. He went inside, leaving me standing on the porch with the moonlight and the tracks and a decision I wasn't ready to make. I looked out at the wilderness, at the mountains and the trees and the endless white expanse. I could disappear into it, become someone else again, or I could stay, fight, risk everything for a piece of land I had no claim to and a man I barely knew. The smart choice was obvious. But as I turned and saw the warm light spilling from the cabin window, saw the smoke rising from the chimney, I realized something. I was tired of being smart, tired of running, tired of surviving instead of living. I went back inside. Silas was at the table, loading bullets into the rifle. I'm staying, I said. He looked up. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face, just for a second. Then it was gone. All right then. First thing tomorrow, we ride down to Katie's. She needs to know what's coming, and we need to make a plan. I nodded and went back to my room, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to him move above me, and wondered if I'd just made the bravest decision of my life or the last one. The decision to stay changed everything and nothing at the same time. Life at the cabin continued in its quiet rhythm. I woke before dawn, built the fire, made coffee. Silas came down from the loft, drank his cup standing by the window, then headed out to check traps or mend fences, or do whatever needed doing on a homestead this far from civilization. But something had shifted between us. The air felt different, charged. He looked at me now, really looked, not the careful avoidance of those first weeks. And I caught myself watching him too, the way he moved through space, with unconscious grace despite favoring his right side, the way his hands worked wood or rope with patient precision, the way he said my name, Eleanor, like he was tasting it, learning its shape. December settled over the mountains like a heavy blanket. The snow came almost daily now, adding inches to the already deep drifts. Silas worked longer hours, racing against winter to finish repairs that couldn't wait until spring. I watched him push himself too hard, saw the way he winced when he thought I wasn't looking, saw the tension in his shoulders at the end of each day. "You're going to hurt yourself," I told him one evening as he came in late, moving stiffly. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted." He hung his coat on the left peg, same as always. "Fence line on the south ridge is weak. If it goes down in a storm, we'll lose access to the spring. Can't let that happen. It can wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow there might be another storm." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that killing himself to fix a fence wasn't worth it. But I understood the drive, the need to control something, anything, when so much felt uncertain. So I heated water for a bath and left the liniment on the table without comment. 3 days later, the storm everyone had been predicting finally hit. It came in the middle of the night, wind screaming down from the peaks with a fury that shook the cabin walls. I lay in my narrow bed listening to the timbers creak and groan, hoping they'd hold. By morning, the world had disappeared into white. Snow fell so thick I couldn't see the woodshed 20 feet from the door. Silas came down from the loft with his heavy coat already on. "Don't even think about it," I said. "That fence won't hold in this wind." "Then let it fall. You can fix it when the storm passes. If it falls, snow will block the trail to the spring. We'll have no water. We have the rain barrel. We have snow we can melt." He looked at me, and for a moment I thought he might listen. Then he shook his head. "I'll be back in a few hours." "Silas." "I know what I'm doing, Eleanor." He went out into the storm before I could stop him. The door slammed shut behind him, and I was left standing in the warm cabin, heart pounding with a fear I couldn't name. I tried to stay busy, swept floors that didn't need sweeping, kneaded bread dough until my hands ached, made soup that sat cooling on the stove because I had no appetite. The clock on the shelf ticked away the hours. 10 in the morning became noon. Noon became 2. 2 became 4, and the light was already failing, swallowed by the storm. I stood at the window, watching the world turn gray, then dark. Put more wood on the fire, heated water for coffee. 5 o'clock. 6. He should have been back by now. Should have realized the fence could wait. Should have turned around when the storm got worse. Unless he couldn't turn around. Unless something had happened. I pulled on my coat, wrapped my shawl over it, and pushed open the door. The wind hit me like a fist. I staggered back, caught myself on the doorframe, and forced my way out into the storm. The cold was immediate and absolute. It burned my lungs with every breath, made my eyes water and freeze. I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. I knew the trail to the south ridge, had walked it 6 times in the past month. But in the storm, with snow covering every landmark, it might as well have been a foreign country. I walked anyway, followed what I hoped was the path, using the slope of the ground to guide me. My boots sank deep with every step. Snow found its way inside my coat, melting against my skin. I called his name, but the wind tore the words away before they could travel. 20 minutes in, I couldn't feel my feet. 30 minutes, and I was shaking so hard I could barely walk straight. I should turn back. This was insanity. I was going to die out here, and Silas would come home to find my frozen body in a snowdrift. But I kept walking, because the alternative, going back without him, was worse than dying. Then I saw it, a dark shape against the white, too large to be a tree stump, too still to be an animal. I ran, or tried to, My legs were lead, my feet numb, blocks of ice. But I got there. Silas lay at the base of a rocky outcrop, half buried in snow and loose stone. The ridge had given way, sending a cascade of rock and frozen earth down on top of him. His right leg was pinned between two boulders, bent at an angle that made my stomach lurch. His face was gray, his lips blue, but his eyes opened when I called his name. "Eleanor!" The word came out cracked, barely a whisper. "You shouldn't be out here. Shut up." I knelt beside him, pulling off my gloves to press my fingers against his throat. His pulse was there, thready and slow, but there. My leg. He tried to move, and a sound came out of him that I never wanted to hear again. I looked at the boulders. The larger one was the size of a wash tub, the smaller wedged tight against it. If I could move the big one even a few inches, he might be able to pull free. "When I push, you pull," I said. "Eleanor, you can't lift that. Watch me." I braced my shoulder against the larger boulder and pushed with everything I had. The stone didn't move. I tried again, digging my boots into the snow, straining until my vision swam. Nothing. "Again," Silas said through gritted teeth. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. I shoved. He pulled. The boulder shifted half an inch. "Again!" This time I screamed with the effort, putting every ounce of strength I had into that stone. It moved. 2 inches. 3. Silas yanked his leg through the gap, and the boulder settled back with a grinding thump. For a moment we both just breathed. Then I got my arms under his shoulders and started pulling. He was heavy, dead weight, barely able to help. But I'd dragged feed sacks that weighed more, had moved furniture in that Philadelphia house all by myself because my husband never thought to help. I could do this. The first 100 feet were the hardest, breaking through the crusted snow, finding a rhythm, pull, rest, pull. My back screamed, my arms shook. Sweat ran down my spine despite the cold soaking my dress. Silas made no sound. I didn't know if that was good or bad. 200 feet. I stopped to catch my breath, and that's when I realized I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Couldn't feel my feet. The shaking had stopped, and some distant part of my brain knew that was dangerous. Keep moving. Just keep moving. 300 feet. The cabin should be close now. Had to be close. But I couldn't see it. Couldn't see anything but white and more white. I pulled anyway, because stopping meant dying, and I wasn't ready to die. Not when I'd just decided to live. Then, like a miracle, I saw it. A dark shape in the snow. The corner of the woodshed. I pulled harder, found strength I didn't know I had. 10 more feet. 5. The cabin door. I left Silas on the threshold and staggered inside to build up the fire. My hands wouldn't work right. Wouldn't grip the wood. I used my forearms, my wrists, my teeth when I had to. The fire caught, slowly, painfully. But it caught. I went back for Silas and dragged him the last few feet inside. Kicked the door shut against the storm. We lay on the floor together, both of us shaking, both gasping for air. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. We were alive. For now, that was enough. But when I looked at his leg, at the unnatural angle below the knee, at the blood seeping through his trousers, I knew the hard part was just beginning. I'd saved his life in the storm. Now I had to keep him alive through what came next. I cut away his trouser leg with the kitchen knife, trying to keep my hands steady. The fabric was frozen, stiff with blood and snow. When it fell away, I had to bite back a sound. His leg was bad, worse than I'd let myself imagine while dragging him home. The bone hadn't broken through the skin, but I could see it pressing white against the flesh below his knee. The whole area was already swelling, turning purple and hot. "How bad?" Silas's voice was rough, his face gray with pain. "You'll live." That's not what I asked. I met his eyes. "It's broken. Needs to be set. I can do it, but it's going to hurt." "Everything already hurts." I moved to the cabinet where I kept the few medical supplies I'd brought from Philadelphia. Bandages, laudanum, whiskey. Not much, but it would have to be enough. Drink this. I held the laudanum bottle to his lips. He took a swallow, grimaced. How do you know how to set a broken bone? I've seen it done. That was true. What I didn't say was that I'd done it myself once before. My husband, Judge Brennan, had been thrown from his horse 3 years into our marriage. The doctor was 2 hours away, and Lewis had been in agony. So I'd read the medical book in his library and done what needed doing. Lewis never knew, never asked, just assumed the doctor had arrived while he was unconscious from the laudanum. That was our marriage. Me doing things, him never noticing. I pushed the memory away and focused on the task at hand. I needed splints. Went to the woodpile and found 2 straight branches, roughly the same length. Came back and knelt beside Silas. This is going to hurt, I said again. I know. I put my hands on his leg, feeling for the break. He sucked in a breath but didn't cry out. On 3, I said. 1. I pulled on 2 before he could tense up. The bone shifted with a grinding sound that made my stomach turn. Silas made a noise, low and animal, his whole body going rigid. But the leg was straight now, as straight as I could make it. I bound the splints tight with strips of cloth torn from my spare dress, the calico one I'd been saving for some special occasion that would probably never come. It felt right somehow, using it for this. Giving up something I'd been holding on to for a future that didn't matter as much as the present. When I finished, I sat back and looked at my work. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. Done, I said. Silas's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The laudanum was taking effect, pulling him toward sleep. I covered him with every blanket I could find and built up the fire until the cabin was almost too warm. Then I collapsed into the chair by the stove, every muscle in my body screaming. My hands were shaking, not from cold this time, from the aftermath, from realizing how close we'd come to dying out there. I looked at Silas, unconscious on the floor, and felt something crack open in my chest. This man, this stubborn, broken man, who'd gone out in a blizzard to fix a fence because he couldn't bear to lose control of one more thing. I was falling for him, had been falling since that first night when he'd looked at my tablecloth like it hurt, since he'd reorganized the woodpile, since he'd waited for me to sit down before eating, and that terrified me more than the storm, more than the men hunting me, more than anything, because caring about someone meant having something to lose, and I'd lost too much already. But as I sat there watching him sleep, I realized something else. Maybe loss was the price of love. Maybe you couldn't have one without risking the other. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. The next 8 weeks were the hardest of my life. Silas couldn't walk, could barely sit up without help. Everything he needed, I had to provide. Food, water, help with the chamber pot that I found in a back cupboard and tried not to think too hard about. The first week, he fought me on everything. I can do it myself. You can't. Just let me try. No. Eleanor, I don't care what you think you need. You're going to lie there and let me help you, or you're going to make this worse and possibly die. Your choice. He chose to let me help, grudgingly, with a scowl that would have been intimidating if he hadn't been flat on his back, helpless as a child. By the second week, the fighting stopped. He started saying thank you, started meeting my eyes when I brought him food. By the 3rd week, we'd fallen into a routine. I'd wake early, build up the fire, make coffee, bring him a cup, and help him sit up to drink it. Make breakfast, feed him if his hands were shaking too badly from pain. Change his bandages, read to him from the one book in the cabin, a collection of poems by Walt Whitman that had belonged to Eliza. At night, I'd sleep in the chair by his bedside, close enough to hear if he needed anything. We talked during those long days, about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Kentucky, about coming west after the war, about meeting Eliza at a church social and knowing immediately she was the one. She was singing, he said one afternoon, his voice soft with memory, voice like an angel. I couldn't take my eyes off her. You miss her? Every day. He looked at me. But it's different now. The grief doesn't swallow me whole anymore. I can remember her and smile instead of wanting to die. What changed? You came. Simple as that. Like I'd brought spring to his endless winter. I told him about my marriage, about Louis, who'd been brilliant and kind and completely unable to see me as anything more than a decorative object in his house. He never hit me, I said, never raised his voice, but he made me feel invisible, like I was furniture, pretty to look at but not worth talking to. That's worse in some ways, Silas said. Physical wounds heal, but being ignored, being made to feel like you don't matter, that cuts deeper. Yes. I was surprised he understood. Most men wouldn't. I see you, he said quietly. I know I didn't at first, was too locked in my own head. But I see you now, Eleanor, and you matter. Those words settled into my chest and took root. It was during the 5th week that I found the letter. I'd gone outside to fetch more wood, grateful for the break in the weather. The snow had stopped falling, and the sun was actually shining for the first time in days. When I came back in, something was sticking out from under the door. A piece of paper, folded once. I picked it up with hands that suddenly trembled. No address, no stamp, just my name written on the outside in a hand I didn't recognize. I unfolded it. The message was short. Mrs. Wright, or should I say, Mrs. Brennan, your husband's death was tragic, but the documents you took were not yours to keep. We know you're in Montana. We know you're with the hermit on Thorns Peak. Return what you stole by spring, or we'll take more than your freedom. You know what your husband did. You know what you did. V.M. Vincent Mercer. My blood ran cold. He knew I was here. Had known for weeks, probably. Had been watching, waiting. Eleanor, Silas's voice came from the bed. What is it? I walked over and handed him the letter, watched his face as he read. V.M., he said. Vincent Mercer, the man Katie mentioned. Yes. What does he mean, you know what you did? This was it, the moment I'd been dreading. I could lie, could keep hiding behind half-truths and carefully edited stories, or I could trust him, really trust him, with everything. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. I told you my husband died, that men came looking for papers. I remember. What I didn't tell you was how Louis died, or what those papers really are. I took a breath. Louis didn't die of fever. He was murdered. And the papers I have? They're evidence of a fraud scheme that goes all the way to Washington. Land deals worth millions. Homesteaders cheated out of their property. All of it orchestrated by men like Vincent Mercer. Silas listened without interrupting. Louis was investigating it for the federal government. Someone high up suspected corruption. Asked him to gather evidence quietly. He did. Too well. The night before he was supposed to file his report, someone killed him, made it look like suicide. And you found him. Yes. The memory rose up, vivid and terrible. There was blood everywhere, and a note tucked under his hand where only I would see it. VM threatened me. If something happens, Eleanor, run. So you ran. I grabbed the documents from his safe and ran. Took the first train out of Philadelphia, changed my name, kept moving until I ended up here. I looked at him. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to bring my trouble down on you. But it's too late. Mercer knows I'm here, and he's coming. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took my hand. Then we'll be ready for him. Silas, you can't even walk. I'll walk when I need to, and in the meantime, you're not facing this alone. His grip tightened. We're in this together now, whether you planned it that way or not. That night, I lay in the chair and listened to him sleep, Thought about the letter, about Vincent Mercer out there somewhere, watching and waiting, about the choice I'd made to stay and fight instead of run. I was terrified, but I wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The 8th week after Silas's accident, his leg was finally strong enough to bear weight. I watched him take his first steps with my heart in my throat. He leaned heavily on the cane he'd carved from an oak branch, his face tight with concentration. 3 steps to the table, a pause to catch his breath, 3 steps back. "Good," I said. "I'm moving like an old man." "You're moving. That's what matters." By the time February arrived, he could make it from the bed to the door and back without stopping. The limp would probably never go away completely, but he was mobile, functional, just in time. Because on a cold morning near the end of the month, 3 riders appeared on the trail to our cabin. I saw them first, through the window, recognized the man in front immediately, even from a distance. Vincent Mercer, bowler hat, fine coat, mine. Those pale eyes that I'd last seen in a Philadelphia courtroom, watching my husband's coffin being carried out. "They're here," I said. Silas moved to the window, faster than I'd seen him move in weeks. His hand found the rifle above the door, lifted it down. "Stay inside," he said. "Not a chance." We went out together. Silas with his rifle, me with nothing but my anger and my fear, held in tight check. The 3 riders stopped 20 yards from the porch, Mercer in front, 2 men flanking him. One was broad and thick-necked, clearly hired muscle. The other was younger, maybe late 20s, with nervous eyes that kept darting between Mercer and us. "Mr. Thorne." Mercer's voice was smooth, educated. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Vincent Mercer. I'm an attorney representing the Northern Pacific Railroad." "I know who you are," Silas said. Mercer's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Do you? How interesting." His gaze shifted to me. "And you must be Mrs. Wright. Or do you prefer Thorne now? Or should I call you by your real name, Margaret Brennan?" I said nothing, just stood there, feeling my pulse hammer in my throat. "I'm here about your property, Mr. Thorne," Mercer continued, pulling a document from his coat. "I'm afraid there's been a problem with your land claim. According to our research, Thorne's Peak was never properly registered with the Federal Land Office. That makes it public domain, subject to claim under the Railroad Expansion Act of 1883. Silas's grip tightened on the rifle. "I have deeds, registered with the county in 1873. County registration is not federal registration." Mercer's smile was thin and cold. "I'm sure you understand the distinction. I understand you're trying to steal my land." Strong words. Mercer's eyes went back to me. "But then again, theft seems to run in your household, doesn't it, Mrs. Brennan?" "Get off our property," I said. "Ah," she speaks. "I've been looking for you for 2 years, Margaret. You've led me on quite the chase. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh. Finally traced you here through a wire transfer your sister made. She's quite worried about you, by the way." My blood went cold. He'd gotten to Sarah. "I haven't hurt her," Mercer said, reading my face. "Yet, but I could. Just as I could make things very difficult for Mr. Thorne here, unless we come to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Silas asked, his voice deadly calm. "Simple. Mrs. Brennan returns the documents she stole from her late husband's office, signs an affidavit stating they were fabricated, and in return I withdraw my claim on your land. You keep your mountain. She keeps her freedom. Everyone wins." "Except the people you've been stealing from, Sutkin's," I said. Mercer's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. 50,000 acres across 3 territories. Homesteaders forced off their land with fake federal claims. My husband documented all of it, and you killed him to keep it quiet." "Your husband killed himself. The Philadelphia police were quite clear on that." "My husband was murdered, and I can prove it." "Can you?" Mercer leaned forward in his saddle. "Because last I checked, You're a widow with no legal standing, no property, and no credibility. Oh, I'm an attorney with connections all the way to Washington, but who do you think they'll believe? Silas took a step forward, his weight shifting to his good leg. I think you should leave now. Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of witnesses? Mercer gestured to his two men. I don't think so. You're a smart man, Mr. Thorne. You've survived up here for 12 years because you know when to fight and when to fold. This is a time to fold. I don't fold. Then you'll lose everything. Mercer straightened in his saddle. 3 days. That's how long you have to decide. Bring the documents to Copper Creek, or I file my claim with Judge Brennan. And Mr. Thorne? He smiled. Judge William Brennan is a personal friend of mine. I think you can guess how that hearing will go. He turned his horse and rode away, the two men following. But the younger one looked back, just once. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there. Not hostility. Something else. Confusion, maybe, or guilt. Then they were gone, disappearing into the trees. Silas lowered the rifle and leaned against the porch rail. His leg was shaking from the strain of standing so long. I helped him inside and into the chair by the fire. They're going to take your land, I said. Let them try. Silas, you heard him. Judge Brennan is on his payroll. We can't win in a rigged court. Then we don't play by their rules. He looked up at me. Katie. She witnessed my original land purchase. If anyone can find a way to fight this legally, it's her. It's not enough. Mercer has lawyers, money, power. What does he not have? I thought about it. The documents. Exactly. And as long as you have those, you have leverage. But if I use them, I expose myself. He'll have me arrested. Not if we expose him first. Silas stood, wincing but steady. Tomorrow we ride to Katie's. Tell her everything. Figure out our next move together. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Silas move restlessly in the main room. He'd insisted I take the bedroom while he recovered on a pallet by the fire. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. Soft, careful. I got up and moved silently to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Someone was out there. I reached for the kitchen knife I'd started keeping under my pillow, crossed to the main room. Silas was already awake, sitting up with his rifle across his lap. A soft knock. We looked at each other. Silas gestured for me to stay back, then called out. Who's there? It's Daniel Webb, from earlier. I need to talk to Mrs. Brennan. The younger man, the one who'd looked back. Silas moved to the door, rifle ready, opened it a crack. Daniel Webb stood on the porch, alone, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. He looked terrified. Please, he said. I don't have much time. Mercer thinks I'm checking the horses, but I had to tell you I can't do this anymore. Silas let him in. Daniel stepped inside, his eyes going immediately to me. Mrs. Brennan. I knew your husband. I worked for him 4 years ago. I was a clerk in his chambers. My heart stopped. You knew Lewis? Yes, ma'am, and I know he didn't kill himself. Daniel's hands were shaking. I saw Mr. Mercer leave your husband's office the night he died. I was working late, filing documents. Mercer came out around 11 and he was angry, furious. I'd never seen him like that. Why didn't you tell anyone? I was scared. I had a wife, a baby on the way. Mercer's a dangerous man. I thought if I kept quiet, he'd leave me alone. Daniel's voice broke. But my wife died last year. Fever. And I've been alone, thinking about Judge Brennan, about how he fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And here I am, helping the man who killed him steal from more innocent people. Why are you telling us this now? Silas asked. Because I saw her. Daniel gestured to me. Saw how she took care of you when you were hurt. My wife took care of me like that once when I broke my arm. Nobody's done that since she died. And I thought, if Mrs. Brennan cares that much about a stranger, what kind of person must she be? Not the criminal Mercer says she is. I felt tears prick my eyes, but blinked them back. What do you want from us? Silas asked. Nothing? I want to help. I'll testify about what I saw, about Mercer leaving your husband's office. It's not proof he killed him, but it's something. It could get you killed, I said. I know. Daniel met my eyes. But I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting bad men win because good people are too scared to stand up. Silas and I looked at each other. A whole conversation passed between us in that glance. We're going to Katie Sauer's place tomorrow, Silas said, to plan our next move. You know where that is? Yes, sir. Meet us there at noon. And Daniel, watch your back. Yes, sir. Daniel moved toward the door, then stopped. Mrs. Brennan, I'm sorry about your husband. He was a good man. He deserved better. Thank you. After he left, Silas locked the door and checked every window. We were both too wired to sleep. Do you trust him? I asked. I don't know, but we don't have a lot of options. He looked at me. This is it, Eleanor. The fight you've been running from for 2 years. It's here now. No more hiding. I'm scared. Good. Means you're paying attention. He reached out and took my hand. But you're not alone. Whatever happens, we face it together. I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the calluses and warmth of his palm. Together, I repeated. We sat by the fire until dawn, hands linked, watching the flames dance and planning for a war we might not win. But we were going to fight anyway, because some things are worth fighting for. Land, truth, justice, and each other. The next morning we saddled the horses and rode down to Katie's place. The trail was treacherous with ice, and Silas moved slower than he wanted to, his legs stiff in the cold. Katie met us in her yard, took one look at our faces and said, "How bad?" "Bad," I said. We went inside, and I told her everything, about Lewis, about the documents, about Mercer and his threat. Katie listened without interrupting, smoking her pipe, her weathered face unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You've been carrying this alone for 2 years," she said finally. "Yes. And now you've dragged Silas into it." "I didn't mean to. I know you didn't. But he's in it now, which means I'm in it. Because that stubborn fool up there is the closest thing I've got to family, and I'll be damned if I let some railroad lawyer steal his land." Relief flooded through me. "You'll help?" "Course I'll help. What do you take me for?" She stood and moved to a cabinet, pulled out a wooden box. Been keeping this safe for 12 years. Figured someday it might matter. She opened the box. Inside was the original deed to Silas's land, signed and witnessed, and beneath it, a letter. "Federal registration confirmation," Katie said. "Came in 1874, year after Silas filed with the county. He was too torn up about Eliza to notice, so I kept it safe." Silas stared at the letter. "I registered federally." "You did. I made you do it. You don't remember because you were half out of your mind with grief. But I dragged you to town and stood over you while you filled out the forms." She handed him the letter. "This proves your claim is legitimate under federal law. Mercer's a liar." "He'll claim it's forged," I said. "Let him claim it. Let him. I've got the receipt from the federal land office. I've got 3 witnesses who saw Silas file, and I've got connections." Katie smiled, fierce and sharp. "Circuit Judge Harrison is an old friend. He's in Helena right now, investigating railroad fraud. I sent him a telegraph last week, soon as I heard that city lawyer was sniffing around. He's on his way." "A federal judge?" Hope sparked in my chest. "Better than that. A federal judge who hates corruption and has the power to override local courts." Katie looked at me. "But he'll need evidence. Hard evidence. You got those documents your husband collected?" "Yes." "Then we've got a chance." She relit her pipe. "Small chance, but a chance." At noon, Daniel Webb arrived, looking pale but determined. We spent the afternoon planning, going over what we knew, what we could prove, what would hold up in court. By the time the sun started to set, we had a strategy. Risky, dangerous, but possible. 3 days from now, Mercer will file his claim, Katie said. We need to be ready. Silas, can you ride? I can ride. Then we all go to Copper Creek, make our stand in open court. She looked at each of us in turn. This is going to get ugly. Mercer won't go down easy. You all understand that? We nodded. Good. Katie stood. Then let's go show that bastard what happens when he picks a fight with Montana homesteaders. As we rode back up the mountain that evening, Silas beside me and hope burning in my chest for the first time in years, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The lies, the running, the fear, and the moment I'd decided to stop running and start fighting. Tomorrow we'd ride into Copper Creek and face Vincent Mercer in court. Tomorrow I'd have to stand up and tell the truth, knowing it could cost me everything. But tonight I had this. The quiet ride home. The man beside me who'd chosen to stand with me even when it would have been easier to let me go. The allies who'd decided I was worth fighting for. We rode into the cabin yard as the last light faded from the sky. Silas dismounted with a grimace, his leg clearly aching after the long ride. I helped him inside, my hand on his elbow. Eleanor, he said, as I turned to light the lamp. Yes. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the court decides, I want you to know. He stopped, struggling with words. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I don't feel brave. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. He reached out and touched my face, his rough palm gentle against my cheek. And that's what you've been doing for 2 years. That takes more courage than most people have in their whole lives. I leaned into his touch, feeling tears threaten. Thank you, I whispered, for believing in me, for standing with me. Always, he said, for as long as you'll have me. That night I wrote one final letter, not in code this time, plain English, to Sarah, my sister in Philadelphia, telling her where I was, what I was about to do, and that if things went wrong, she should know I died fighting instead of running. I sealed it and set it on the table. Then I climbed into bed and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who'd finally stopped being afraid. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. But tonight, I was home, and that was enough. The journey down to Copper Creek took most of the morning. Silas rode ahead on the black gelding, his back straight, despite the pain I knew he still carried in his leg. I followed on the sorrel mare, with Danny Webb riding beside me on a borrowed horse from Katie's stable. Danny had stayed at the cabin for 3 days after that night he came to confess. 3 days of careful planning, of mapping out what we knew and what we could prove. He was younger than I'd first thought, maybe 28, with sandy hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes that couldn't quite meet mine when he talked about Judge Brennan. I should have said something 2 years ago, he'd told me that first night. I saw Mercer leave your husband's office, saw the way he looked, angry, dangerous. Next morning when they found the judge, when they said suicide, I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid. We're all afraid, I'd said. Now, as we rode through the cold March morning, I watched the valley open up below us. Copper Creek sprawled along the frozen river, a collection of wooden buildings and muddy streets that served as civilization for 50 miles in any direction. Katie Sauer met us at the edge of town. She sat astride her gray mare like a general surveying troops, her face grim beneath her wide-brimmed hat. Circuit Judge arrived yesterday, she said without preamble. Harrison, from Helena. Mercer doesn't know yet. Relief flooded through me. Judge Harrison. I'd heard of him. A federal appointee with a reputation for honesty in a territory where honesty was rare as gold. Where is he? Silas asked. Hotel, resting, but he'll be at the courthouse this afternoon. Mercer's scheduled his hearing for 2 o'clock. Katie's eyes found mine. You ready for this? I touched the leather satchel strapped to my saddle. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the documents that had cost my husband his life. 50 pages of carefully recorded fraud. Names, dates, forged signatures, the evidence that could bring down Vincent Mercer and the men who'd hired him, as ready as I'll ever be. We rode into town together. People stopped to stare. News traveled fast in small places, and by now everyone knew about the hermit from Thorn's Peak and his mysterious mail-order bride, about the trouble that had come looking for her. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building at the end of Main Street. Its windows reflected the pale morning sun like blank eyes. We tied our horses at the rail outside and climbed the steps. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco and old paper, and the particular staleness of places where justice was bought and sold. A clerk sat at a desk in the front hall, scratching entries into a ledger. "Circuit Judge Harrison," Katie said. "Where is he?" The clerk looked up, took in our group, and pointed toward a door marked Chambers. Katie knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. The man behind the desk was older than I'd expected, maybe 55, with iron-gray hair and a face carved by years of seeing the worst humanity had to offer. He looked up from the document he was reading, and his eyes went straight to me. "Mrs. Brennan, not a question." "Your Honor." "I've been expecting you." He stood and gestured to the chairs arranged before his desk. Katie's telegram was very informative. "Sit, all of you." We sat. Silas positioned himself close enough that his shoulder nearly touched mine, a small gesture of solidarity that gave me more courage than he could know. Judge Harrison folded his hands on the desk. "I've been investigating this fraud case for 3 years, ever since the first complaints came across my desk about families losing their land to railroad claims that seemed questionable at best, but I've never had proof, just suspicions and dead ends." "I have proof," I said. "Documents my husband compiled before he died, before he was murdered." "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." I opened my satchel and withdrew the oilcloth bundle, set it on his desk. Harrison unwrapped it carefully. His eyes moved over the first page, then the second. His jaw tightened. "How did your husband obtain these?" "He was investigating the railroad's land acquisitions for the federal government. Someone high up suspected corruption. My husband was asked to gather evidence quietly." I paused. "He gathered too much, and Vincent Mercer found out." "You have proof Mercer killed him?" I looked at Danny. He cleared his throat. "I was working as a clerk in Mercer's law office 2 years ago. The night Judge Brennan died, I saw Mr. Mercer leave the judge's chambers around 11 o'clock. He was angry, agitated. Next morning, the judge was found dead, and the police ruled it suicide." Danny's hands gripped his knees. "But I'd seen the judge that afternoon. He wasn't suicidal. He was excited, said he was about to expose something big." Harrison listened without interruption. When Danny finished, the judge turned back to the documents, reading page after page in silence. Finally, he looked up. "This is substantial, more than substantial. This is enough to bring federal charges against Mercer and at least a dozen other men. But there's a problem." My heart sank. "What problem?" "Mercer filed his claim against Mr. Thorne's land yesterday, got Judge Brennan to sign off on it." He held up a hand before I could protest. "Not that Judge Brennan. William Brennan. No relation to your late husband, local judge. Been on the railroad payroll for years." "So what does that mean?" Silas's voice was tight. "It means Mercer's moving fast. He knows Mrs. Brennan is here, knows she has the documents. He's trying to force the issue before I can intervene." Harrison stood. "The hearing is set for 2 o'clock. I'll be attending as an observer. If I see anything improper, I can override Brennan's authority and take jurisdiction myself." "And if you don't see anything improper?" I asked. "Then Mr. Thorne loses his land, and you lose your leverage. Mercer gets what he wants either way." The courtroom filled quickly. It seemed half the town had come to watch, drawn by the promise of drama. They packed the wooden benches, their faces curious and hungry for entertainment. Vincent Mercer sat at the front table with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall, well-dressed, with pale eyes that tracked my entrance like a predator watching prey. When his gaze found me, he smiled. Not a pleasant smile, a victorious one. We took our seats at the opposing table, Silas on my right, Katie on my left, Danny behind us. Judge William Brennan sat on the raised platform, looking bored and corrupt in equal measure. The hearing began. Mercer stood and presented his case with practiced efficiency. The land claim was simple, he said. Thorn's Peak had never been properly registered with the Federal Land Office. Under territorial law, unregistered homesteads reverted to public domain after 10 years. The railroad, as an agent of public interest, had every right to claim the land for the expansion of their northern route. Katie stood to counter. She presented the original deed from 1873, signed and witnessed. She presented testimony from 3 neighbors who'd seen Silas work the land for 12 years straight. Mercer smiled through it all. When Katie sat down, he stood again. Your Honor, while I don't doubt these people's sincerity, the fact remains that county registration is not federal registration. According to Territorial Statute 47, Section 12, all homestead claims must be re-registered with the Federal Land Office every 10 years to remain valid. I'd known this argument was coming, had prepared for it. I stood. Your Honor, that statute doesn't exist. Every head in the courtroom turned toward me. Judge Brennan frowned. And you are? Eleanor Thorne, Silas Thorne's wife. Mercer's smile widened. Actually, Your Honor, this woman is Margaret Eleanor Brennan, widow of Judge Lewis Brennan of Philadelphia. She's wanted in 3 states for theft of federal documents and conspiracy to commit fraud. The courtroom erupted. Voices rose, people standing to get a better look at me. Judge Brennan hammered his gavel. Order! I'll have order! When the noise died down, Mercer continued, his voice smooth as silk. Mrs. Brennan fled Philadelphia 2 years ago with documents stolen from her deceased husband's office. She's been living under an assumed name, hiding from justice. I have warrants for her arrest. He produced papers from his case and handed them to the judge. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. Those warrants are fraudulent. I didn't steal anything. Those documents were my husband's work, and they prove that Mr. Mercer and his associates have been defrauding homesteaders across 3 territories. Prove it, Mercer said. I reached for my satchel. Judge Brennan held up his hand. Before we go any further, I'm placing Mrs. Brennan under arrest pending verification of these warrants. No. Silas stood, his voice cutting through the room. You're not touching her. Mr. Thorne, sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt. I don't care what you hold me for. She's my wife, and she's not going anywhere. Silas stepped in front of me, physically blocking me from the bailiff who'd started moving in our direction. His right leg buckled slightly under his weight, and I saw the flash of pain cross his face, but he didn't move. The bailiff reached for him. Silas's left hand shot out, catching the man's wrist. For a moment, the whole courtroom held its breath. Then a voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Circuit Judge Harrison walked down the center aisle, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He carried a leather folder under his arm, and his face was carved from stone. Judge Harrison. William Brennan's face had gone pale. I didn't realize you were attending this hearing. Obviously. Harrison climbed the steps to the platform. Step aside, William. I beg your pardon? I said, step aside. I'm taking jurisdiction of this case under federal authority. You're suspended pending investigation into your conduct. The courtroom erupted again. Brennan sputtered protests. Mercer's face lost all expression, becoming a careful blank. Harrison ignored them both. He took Brennan's seat and hammered the gavel once. This court is now in session under federal jurisdiction. Mrs. Brennan, approach the bench. I walked forward on legs that threatened to give out. Harrison looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes. Not sympathy. Understanding. You have the documents? He asked quietly. Yes, Your Honor. Present them. I returned to the table and retrieved the bundle, carried it back to Harrison and laid it before him. He opened it and began to read. The courtroom waited in absolute silence. Even Mercer had stopped smiling. After 10 minutes, Harrison looked up. Mr. Mercer, approach. Mercer stood and walked to the bench, his movements controlled and precise. These documents detail a systematic fraud spanning 3 territories and involving the theft of over 50,000 acres of homestead land. They name you specifically as a coordinator of this fraud. They also contain notes from Judge Lewis Brennan, indicating he believed you threatened his life. Harrison's voice was flat, judicial. What do you have to say? Those documents are fabricated. Mrs. Brennan created them to cover her own crimes. That's interesting, because I've been investigating this case independently for 3 years, and everything in these documents matches what I've found. Names, dates, transactions. The only thing I was missing was proof of forgery. He held up one of the pages. This is a federal land certificate. Do you notice anything unusual about it? Mercer's jaw tightened. No, Your Honor. The seal is blue. Federal seals have been printed in red ink since 1875. This document is dated 1884, which means it's a forgery. Harrison set the paper down. Mrs. Brennan, did you create this document? No, Your Honor. That's one of the forgeries my husband collected as evidence. Harrison nodded and turned back to Mercer. I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Murder? Mercer's composure finally cracked. I never killed anyone. Judge Lewis Brennan was murdered in his chambers 2 years ago. The Philadelphia police ruled it suicide, but I've reviewed the case file. The evidence was always questionable. And now I have a witness. Danny Webb stood from his seat. His hands were shaking, but his voice was clear. I saw Mr. Mercer leave Judge Brennan's office the night he died. I saw him angry and threatening, and the next morning I saw the judge dead with no gun in his hand, even though the police said he shot himself. Mercer's face twisted. This boy worked for me. He's lying to protect her. I worked for you for 3 months, Danny said. I worked for Judge Brennan for 4 years. I know which one of you deserved my loyalty. Harrison gestured to the bailiff. Take Mr. Mercer into custody. As the bailiff moved forward, Mercer lunged toward me. Silas was faster. He caught Mercer's arm with his left hand and twisted, using the man's own momentum to send him stumbling into the bailiff's grasp. For just a moment, Silas and I stood side by side, both breathing hard, both shaking with adrenaline. Harrison hammered his gavel. Mr. Thorne's land claim is validated and recorded. All charges against Mrs. Brennan are dismissed. This court is adjourned. The courtroom exploded into noise, people shouting, pushing forward to see Mercer being led away in chains. Katie grabbed my arm to keep me from being swept up in the crowd, but I only had eyes for Silas. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Relief, pride, something deeper. We won, I said. You won. He touched my face, just briefly, his rough fingers gentle against my cheek. You stood up and fought. Outside the courthouse, Judge Harrison found us as we were preparing to ride back up the mountain. Mrs. Brennan, a word. I handed my reins to Silas and walked back to where Harrison stood on the steps. The federal investigation will need your testimony, he said. There are at least 15 other men involved in this fraud. We'll need you in Washington to testify before a grand jury. My stomach dropped. How long? 6 months, maybe more. I looked back at Silas, standing by the horses, watching us. I can't leave, I said. Not now. I understand, but these men stole from thousands of families, destroyed lives. You're the only one who can make sure they face justice. Harrison's face softened slightly. Your husband died trying to stop them. This is how you finish his work. I closed my eyes, felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders, the choice I didn't want to make. When I opened them, Silas was walking toward us. He'd heard enough to understand. How long? He asked Harrison. 6 months. Silas looked at me. You have to go. I don't want to leave you. I know. He took my hand, right there, in front of Judge Harrison and Katie, and half the town watching from the street. But those people need you, the ones who lost everything. You can speak for them. What if... I couldn't finish the sentence. What if you forget me? What if you realize you're better off alone? What if I come back and you've moved on? I waited 12 years for Eliza to come back from the dead, Silas said quietly. I can wait 6 months for you to come back from Washington. The trip back up the mountain was quiet. Katie rode with us, and Danny too. We made a strange caravan through the melting snow, 4 people who'd become unlikely allies. When we reached the cabin, the sun was setting behind the western ridge, painting everything gold and orange and deep purple. Silas helped me down from my horse. His hands lingered on my waist just a moment longer than necessary. Come with me, he said. There's something I want to show you. He led me around the cabin to a place I'd never been. Behind the woodshed, sheltered by pines, a small clearing opened up, and there, marked by a simple stone, was Eliza's grave. I stopped, uncertain. It's all right, Silas said. I want you to see her. We walked to the grave together. Someone had planted wild indigo around the stone. Not the blue flowers from my tablecloth, but the purple kind that grew wild in these mountains. I thought Eliza hated wild indigo, I said. She hated the blue ones, reminded her of funerals. He knelt and brushed snow from the stone. But she loved the purple, said they were the color of hope. He stood and looked at me. I loved her. I'll always love her. And I'll always carry the guilt of not being here when she needed me. Silas, but I love you too. The words came out rough, like they hurt. Different, not less, just different. I knelt by the grave and put my hand on the cold stone. Thank you, I whispered, for loving him first, for teaching him it was okay to let someone in again. When I stood, Silas pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden carving, a bird, wings spread in flight. I made this for you. It's not a ring. I gave my ring to Eliza. This is something just ours. I took the carving. It was warm from his pocket, smooth from hours of careful work. A hawk, I realized, not soft or delicate, strong. You're not a songbird, Silas said. You're a hunter. You fight. You survive. You fly. I couldn't speak, could only hold the wooden hawk and feel tears sliding down my face for the first time since my husband died. We stood there as the sun set and the stars came out, and I knew I was making the right choice, even though it was tearing me apart. That night, we sat on the porch in the 2 chairs that had always been there, waiting for someone to use them. When do you leave? Silas asked. Tomorrow. Judge Harrison is arranging travel. That fast. If I don't go now, I'll lose my courage. He took my hand. You're the bravest person I know. I'm terrified. Same thing, mostly. We sat in silence, holding hands, watching the valley below turn silver with moonlight. What if you change your mind, I asked. What if 6 months is too long? Eleanor. He turned to face me. I've been half dead for 12 years. You brought me back to life. I'm not forgetting that. I'm not forgetting you. Promise? I promise. He squeezed my hand. Wait for me, however long it takes. The next morning, Katie came with an extra horse. We packed my few belongings, including the wooden hawk wrapped carefully in my spare dress. Silas walked me to where Katie waited. He didn't try to kiss me. We weren't there yet. But he put his hand on my face and looked at me like he was memorizing every detail. Come back to me, he said. I will. Promise? I promise. I mounted the horse and followed Katie down the trail. At the bend where the cabin would disappear from view, I looked back. Silas stood on the porch, one hand raised. Behind him, smoke rose from the chimney. The sun caught the windows, making them glow. Home, I thought. That's what it looked like. Not a place I was leaving, but a place I'd be coming back to. I raised my hand in return. Then I turned my horse downhill and rode away from the only place I'd ever felt like I belonged. The train pulled into Copper Creek on a September afternoon, 6 months and 2 days after I'd left. I stepped onto the platform carrying a single bag and a letter that had changed everything. Official pardon, signed by the president himself. Not just for me. For everyone who'd helped expose the fraud ring. 23 men had been indicted, 18 convicted. Vincent Mercer was serving 15 years in a federal prison. My husband's work was finished, and I was free. The town looked different, smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just gotten used to bigger places. Washington, Philadelphia, where I'd returned one terrible afternoon to testify at Mercer's trial. Cities full of people and noise and everything that wasn't Montana. I'd hated every minute of it. Katie was waiting by the general store, sitting on a bench with her pipe, looking exactly the same as she had 6 months ago. "Took you long enough," she said. "There was paperwork. There's always paperwork." She stood and looked me over. "You're thinner. They not feed you out east?" "They fed me fine. I just wasn't very hungry." She nodded like this made perfect sense. "He's been the same. Eats like a bird. Works like 3 men. Katie told me to tell him to slow down. He'd work himself into an early grave." My heart clenched. "Is he all right?" "Go see for yourself." She handed me the reins to a horse. "Trail's clear. Snow's gone. Wildflowers everywhere. Real pretty if you like that sort of thing." I mounted and looked down at her. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me. Just don't break his heart. It's been broken enough for one lifetime." The ride up the mountain felt longer than I remembered. Every bend in the trail brought me closer, and my heart beat faster with each mile. What if he'd changed his mind? What if 6 months apart had made him realize he was better off alone? What if I got there and found the cabin empty, a note saying he'd moved on? I almost turned back 3 times, but then I crested the final rise, and there it was. The cabin looked different. There were flowers in window boxes, purple wild indigo and white columbine. The porch had been expanded, with 2 new chairs and a small table between them. Smoke rose from the chimney, and standing on the porch, as if he'd been waiting there every day for 6 months, was Silas. He'd shaved. That was the first thing I noticed. The beard was gone, revealing a face younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen. He was thinner, too, but strong. His right arm hung more naturally now, as if the old injury had finally healed properly. We looked at each other across the clearing. 10 seconds, 20. Then I was off the horse and running. He came down the steps, moving fast despite the limp that would probably never completely disappear. We met in the middle of the yard, and I crashed into him hard enough to nearly knock us both down. His arms went around me, and I buried my face in his shoulder and just breathed him in. Pine and wood smoke and soap and something that was just Silas, just home. We stood there for a full minute, not speaking, just holding on. Finally, he pulled back enough to look at me. "You came back." "I promised." "I know, but promises break sometimes. Not mine." He kissed me then, soft at first, tentative, like he wasn't quite sure I was real. Then deeper, sure, claiming. I kissed him back with 6 months of loneliness and longing poured into it. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "Come inside," he said. "I want to show you something." He took my hand and led me into the cabin. I stopped in the doorway, my breath catching. It was still the same space, but it had been transformed. The main room was brighter, with new curtains on the windows. Real furniture, not just the basics. A rug on the floor. Books on a shelf I didn't remember, and through a new door I'd never seen before, a bedroom, not the tiny closet I'd slept in. A real room with a real bed and more windows letting in the afternoon light. "You built this," I said. "All of this." Had to do something with my hands, couldn't stop thinking about you, so I kept working. He looked almost shy. "Wanted you to have a proper home when you came back, if you came back." I turned to face him. "I told you I would." "I know. but 6 months is a long time to wait for something you're not sure you deserve. I put my hand on his face. You deserve everything. That night, Katie and Danny came for dinner. Danny brought his new wife, a quiet woman named Sarah, who smiled when he talked about the law practice he'd opened in Copper Creek. Katie brought a pie and her usual blunt observations. "About time you two figured it out," she said, watching Silas and me move around the kitchen together with the easy rhythm of people who belonged in the same space. "Been obvious since the first day she showed up you were meant for each other." "You hated me the first day I showed up," I pointed out. "Didn't say I liked it, just said it was obvious." After they left, Silas and I sat on the new porch in the gathering dark. The valley below was alive with the sounds of spring becoming summer, birds calling, a distant creek rushing with snowmelt, wind in the pines. "Tell me about Washington," he said. So I did. Told him about the hearings and the testimony and the moment the jury foreman read out the guilty verdicts. Told him about visiting my husband's grave in Philadelphia, saying a proper goodbye. Told him about the nights I'd lain awake in expensive hotel rooms, unable to sleep because they were too quiet, too empty, too far from Montana. "I kept thinking about coffee," I said. "How you'd wait for me to sit down before you ate. How you reorganized the woodpile so I could reach. All those small things that said I mattered. You did matter. You do matter. I know that now." I looked at him, but it took leaving to understand that this, right here, was the first place I ever felt like I belonged. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and pulled me to my feet. "Come with me. One more thing I want to show you." He led me around the cabin to the clearing where Eliza was buried. The purple indigo had spread, creating a carpet of color around the simple stone. But there was something new. A second stone, smaller, placed a few feet from the first. I knelt to read the inscription. "Judge Lewis Brennan died, fighting for justice." I looked up at Silas. "You did this?" Wrote to the cemetery in Philadelphia, had them send me the dates, figured he deserved to be remembered somewhere by people who understood what he fought for. He knelt beside me. "He gave you to me. Least I could do was give him a place in our story." Our story. The words settled into my heart and took root. "Thank you," I whispered. We knelt there together as the stars came out, two broken people who'd somehow managed to build something whole. The wedding was 2 days later in the small church in Copper Creek. Katie stood up as my witness. Danny stood up for Silas. Half the town came, more out of curiosity than friendship, but I didn't care. I wore a simple blue dress that Katie had altered to fit. Silas wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed. We stood before the circuit preacher and made vows that actually meant something this time. "I promise to see you," Silas said, "every day, for the rest of my life." "I promise to stay," I said, "not because I have to, but because I choose you, every single day." When the preacher pronounced us married, Silas kissed me in front of everyone, and I didn't care who was watching. That night, in our new bedroom with the windows open to the mountain air, we lay together and talked about the future. "I want to build a barn," Silas said, "big enough for horses, maybe some cattle. I want to plant a garden, vegetables, herbs, maybe some of those purple indigo flowers. I want to wake up every morning and know you're here. I want to grow old with you." We fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't dream about blood or running or men with pale eyes. I dreamed about spring and gardens and a future that looked like hope. 1 year later, almost to the day, I stood in the garden I'd planted and felt the baby move inside me. 7 months pregnant, round as a harvest moon, and happier than I'd ever been in my life. Silas was at the fence line, repairing a section that had come loose in the last storm. His limp was barely noticeable now, just a slight hitch in his step that you'd only see if you were looking for it. Katie rode up the trail, bringing supplies from town. She'd taken to visiting once a week, and somewhere along the way we'd stopped being allies and become friends. "You're glowing," she said, dismounting with a grunt. Disgusting. You love it. I tolerate it. But she was smiling. That evening, the three of us sat on the porch while the sun set. Silas had his hand on my belly, feeling the baby kick. Boy or girl? Katie asked. Don't know. Don't care, Silas said. Liar. You're hoping for a girl. He smiled, not denying it. Later, after Katie left and Silas went to check the barn one last time before bed, I sat alone and wrote in the journal I'd been keeping. The words came easily now, not in code, not hiding, just truth. I wrote about the day I arrived in Montana with $3 and a lie, about the man who'd agreed to marry a stranger because he was too broken to hope for anything real, about coffee kept warm and wood piles rearranged, and all the small ways we'd learned to love each other. I wrote about running and fighting and choosing to stay, and I wrote about this right now, sitting on a porch in the mountains with a baby growing inside me and a man who saw me, really saw me, every single day. People ask me sometimes when I knew he was the one, usually women in town, curious about the mail-order bride who stayed when she could have run. I tell them I didn't know, not at the train station, not the first month, not even when he said my name like it mattered. I knew when I was dragging him through snow with bleeding hands and a breaking back, thinking if he dies, I die. Not because I couldn't survive without him, but because I didn't want to. Love isn't finding someone who completes you. It's finding someone who witnesses you, who sees you, who chooses you, every single day, even when you're difficult and broken and carrying secrets that could destroy you both. Silas chose me when I was running. I chose him when he was drowning, and now we choose each other. Every morning when we wake up, every night when we sit on this porch and watch the stars come out. This cabin isn't just wood and stone. It's proof that even the most broken people can build something whole. Tomorrow, we'll plant more indigo. Silas says it reminds him of hope. I say it reminds me of home. We're both right. Silas came back up from the barn and sat beside me, took my hand without speaking. We didn't need words anymore, not for this. The valley below turned silver with moonlight. An owl called from the pines. The baby kicked, and Silas smiled. You happy? He asked. Yes. Good. He squeezed my hand. Me too. And that was it. That was everything. Not a grand declaration or a perfect moment. Just two people on a porch, holding hands, choosing each other one more time. They say some loves come loud, with fireworks and grand gestures. Ours came quiet, with coffee kept warm, with wood stacked just right, with two broken people learning to be whole. And you know what? That was more than enough. It was everything. The end.